Viewer discretion advised. This content contains intensely disturbing real-life accounts and may not be suitable for viewers under 18 or those who are sensitive to fear-based content. If you are under 18 or easily frightened, please stop watching now. You have been warned. The carnival at the end of the block. There are moments in a person's life that act as fault lines, before and after. Before, the world makes a certain kind of sense. After, it never quite fits together the same way again. What I'm about to tell you is one of those moments. It happened to me when I was 12 years old enough to understand the world around me, old enough to read a situation and feel something was wrong, but still young enough to be exactly the kind of kid that certain people, certain things, are drawn to. I grew up in a suburb just outside of Columbus, Ohio. Our neighborhood was the kind of place that felt safe in that particular Midwestern way. Block parties in July, neighbors who waved from their driveways, kids on bikes, until the streetlights flickered on. We lived on a dead-end street, which I always thought made our neighborhood feel tucked away from the rest of the world. At the end of our road, the pavement gave way to a wide storm drainage basin, what locals called a retention pond, and beyond that a thick stretch of woods that connected to Millbrook Nature Preserve. If you walked the trail through those woods for about half a mile, following the creek bed until the ground leveled out, you'd eventually push through a chain-link fence and emerge into Crestview Community Park. Most of the time, that park was ordinary, rusted swing sets, a pavilion that smelled like old barbecue smoke, a gravel parking lot that was half empty on weekends. But that one Saturday night in early October, the park was transformed. Someone had set up a traveling carnival. I found out about it from my neighbor when I was sitting on our front porch, scrolling through my phone and feeling sorry for myself because all my friends were busy. I could actually see the glow of the lights cutting through the trees from where I sat. The faint mechanical groan of a spinning ride drifted through the still night air. My mom came out and leaned against the porch railing, looking in the same direction I was. "Why don't you walk over and check it out?" she said. My mom was not the kind of parent who kept her kids wrapped in bubble wrap. She believed in letting kids be kids, in learning through experience, in trusting that I had good enough instincts to stay out of real trouble. She was right about that, usually. So I grabbed my flashlight from the kitchen drawer, laced up my sneakers, and headed for the trail. The woods at night have a way of sharpening your senses. Every snapped twig sounds like a gunshot. Every rustling branch feels personal. I kept my flashlight aimed at the path and moved quickly, the beam cutting pale yellow tunnels through the dark. The sound of the carnival grew louder as I walked. Music from a speaker somewhere, children laughing, the electronic ding of a midway game. By the time I reached the fence and ducked through the gap where the chain link had been peeled back, I was standing in the middle of something out of a movie. The rides were lit up in cascading strings of orange and yellow bulbs. There was a Ferris wheel, its gondolas rocking gently as it turned. A compact roller coaster, the kind that shrieks and rattles more than it terrifies. A set of spinning tilt-a-whirl cars that made the people inside scream with laughter. Rows of game booths lined the perimeter, each one stuffed with oversized stuffed animals. The smell of fried dough and caramel corn was overwhelming in the best possible way. It was late enough that the crowd had thinned out, which suited me just fine. I liked the way the park felt at that hour, electric but unhurried, like the carnival was winding down into something more intimate. Families with strollers had gone home. What remained were teenagers in groups and a few stubborn adults, unwilling to let the night end. At the far end of the grounds, almost hidden behind the roller coaster, there was a large tent. Not a game tent or a food tent. This one was tall, striped in faded red and white, with the canvas panels slightly rippling in the breeze. A hand-painted sign above the entrance read, "Clown Show, one night only." A handful of people were ducking inside, and curiosity pulled me after them. The inside of the tent was dim, lit by a single row of bare bulbs strung along the center. 4 rows of folding metal chairs faced a low wooden stage. Most of the seats were taken, and on the stage, tiny, cluttered with props, 3 clowns were performing. One rode a comically undersized bicycle in slow, deliberate circles. One stood off to the side, juggling 3 rubber balls with mechanical precision. The third was dancing. I want to be specific about the word dancing because it wasn't joyful. It was rhythmic and slightly off, the way a person moves when they're trying to imitate dancing without really feeling it. He wore oversized shoes that slapped the stage with every step. His costume was a patchwork of yellow and orange diamonds, and his face, white with a painted red grin and exaggerated black triangles above each eye, was expressionless beneath the makeup. That last part is what I remember most clearly. Clowns are supposed to perform their emotions. Their whole purpose is exaggeration. But this one's face was still, not still like calm, still like waiting. I stood near the entrance, half in and half out, and then the dancing clown stopped. He turned his head and looked directly at me. Even from 30 feet away, across a crowded tent, I felt it, the specific, uncomfortable weight of being seen by someone who had been watching you for longer than they should have been. He raised one hand slowly and crooked his index finger. Not a wave, not a playful, "Come here." A deliberate, patient beckoning, the kind that suggested he had all the time in the world and fully expected me to walk toward him. I did not. I backed out of the tent without turning around, keeping my eyes on him until the canvas flap fell closed between us. I ran into a guy I knew from school at the ring toss booth, and we walked around together for the better part of an hour, tossing rubber rings and eating corn dogs and talking about nothing in particular. By the time we said goodbye, the carnival workers were dismantling booths at the edges of the grounds, and the rides had gone dark. The Ferris wheel stood still and silent, its gondolas swaying almost imperceptibly. I made my way back toward the gap in the fence, the trail back through the preserve, and home. I had almost reached the fence when I heard a voice behind me. "Hey, wait up!" I turned slowly, already not wanting to see what I was about to see. It was the clown, the dancing one. He had changed out of part of his costume. He wasn't wearing the oversized shoes anymore, but the makeup was still fully intact. He was close enough that I could see the texture of it, thick and pancake flat across his features, running slightly along the creases of his cheeks. He smiled. Or rather, the painted smile was there, and his actual face was doing something underneath it that I couldn't read. "You want to see backstage?" he said. His voice was conversational, almost friendly. "There's stuff back there the audience never gets to see. Pretty cool, actually." "No, thanks," I said. I'm not sure how my voice sounded. I hope it sounded normal. I turned and walked into the woods. For the first 100 yards, I forced myself to walk at a normal pace. I looked back twice, and both times the clown was still visible at the edge of the tree line, just standing there, not following, watching me go with that fixed painted grin. The third time I looked back, he was gone. That's when I started moving faster. I want to tell you that I shook it off by the time I got home, that I laughed it off as some weird carny who'd had one too many energy drinks and thought he was being friendly. But I didn't feel that way. I felt the specific, cold certainty of someone who has been targeted, who has been looked at not as a person but as an opportunity. I was 3/4 of the way through the preserve. I could see where the trail curved toward the drainage basin, could almost make out the faint glow of my street's lights through the trees, when I heard footsteps behind me. Not the footsteps of an animal, not a deer or a raccoon moving through the underbrush. These were deliberate, two-footed, measured footsteps on the trail, behind me. I turned. The clown walked out of the darkness and into the beam of my flashlight. He hadn't rushed. He wasn't out of breath. He was simply there, as if he had been waiting at a point along the trail he already knew I would pass. He was close, closer than he should have been able to get without me hearing him sooner, maybe 20 feet away. He tilted his head slightly to one side, and that painted mouth stretched even wider. I threw my flashlight at him. I don't know why that was my first instinct. Maybe I thought it would blind him or startle him or buy me half a second. I didn't wait to find out if it worked. I just ran. I ran the way you run when you are genuinely, completely terrified, not worrying about your footing or the branches whipping against your arms, just running, your lungs and legs in open negotiation about how long they can hold on. I could hear him behind me. Footsteps on the dirt path, closer than I wanted them to be. I ran until I burst out of the tree line and onto the sidewalk of my street, and it was only then, when I was on concrete and under the orange wash of a streetlight, that I heard the footsteps stop. I didn't look back. I ran all the way to my front door. My mom was on the couch when I came in, and she immediately started asking questions. My face must have looked like what it was. I told her I'd been jogging through the preserve for the cardio. She looked at me for a long moment in that way mothers look at their kids when they know they're not getting the full story. And then she let it go. I never told her the truth. I was terrified that if I did, she'd stop letting me go out on my own, that the freedom I'd been given, the freedom I genuinely treasured, would be locked away along with that story. So I kept it. I carried it home and I kept it there, in the part of my mind where things live that you're not ready to look at directly. For years it felt like something that had happened to someone else. A story I'd heard, not one I'd lived, but I know what I felt when that flashlight beam hit his face. I know what was in those eyes. And I know that whatever that clown wanted with a 12-year-old kid, alone in the woods at night, it was nothing good. 3 keys in the dark. I need to give you some context before I tell you this story, because the context matters. I was 14 years old, and I had been afraid of clowns since I was 5. I remember that first encounter clearly. A county fair in late summer, my parents distracted at a food stand, and a clown who appeared from nowhere to hand me a balloon animal. He was loud and broad, and his smile was painted so wide it split his face into thirds. I screamed. I cried. I had to be carried to the car. Kids are afraid of all kinds of things, and most of those fears fade with time. Mine did not. By 14, it wasn't a paralyzing fear anymore. I didn't freeze up. I could walk past a clown at an event without running, but the feeling was still there, low and steady, like a pilot light that never quite went out. Something about that combination, the artificial face over the real one, the performance of a feeling rather than the feeling itself, tripped a wire in me that I couldn't talk myself out of. I tell you this because I want you to understand that what happened that November was not just frightening. It was the thing I'd been quietly dreading for 9 years being handed to me in the worst possible way. It was a Tuesday night, which matters only because it was quiet. A Tuesday night in November in a mid-sized town in Wisconsin means cold sidewalks and empty roads and the particular silence of a neighborhood that has already turned inward for the season. My parents were away for the week. A work trip my dad's company had extended into something resembling a vacation. My older sister and brother were both out. I was alone in the house, which didn't bother me. I was 14, not 4. My friend Marcus texted me that afternoon. There was a traveling fair set up in the parking lot of the old strip mall 2 blocks over, one of those pop-up operations that materialized on empty pavement every few months. He wanted to check it out. I said sure. We bundled up and walked over around 8. The fare was modest, maybe a dozen rides and twice as many game booths, all of them lit with strings of white LEDs that gave the parking lot a cold, slightly clinical brightness. The temperature had dropped into the low 40s. Most of the families had gone home. The people who remained were teenagers and young adults who leaned against game booths and talked in tight clusters, cups of hot cocoa steaming in their hands. Marcus and I played a few games. He won a small stuffed bear at the basketball toss and immediately started pretending it was a microphone. We bought hot chocolate from a stand near the center of the lot and walked in slow circles, warming our hands on the cups. It was a good night, uncomplicated, the kind of night that feels exactly like what it is. 2 kids, 2 cups of cocoa, a cold parking lot, nothing much happening. That's when we saw the clown. He was standing near the edge of the midway between a ring toss booth and a balloon dart game. He was shorter than I expected, and he wasn't performing exactly. He wasn't doing tricks or making animals out of balloons or chasing kids around with a squeaky horn. He was just standing there and smiling. His costume was white and black, white ruffled collar, black jumpsuit, a thin coat of white face paint with only a small red diamond painted on one cheek. He looked less like a traditional carnival clown and more like a mime who hadn't fully committed to the bit. He wasn't holding anything. He wasn't speaking. His eyes tracked us as we walked past, and I felt the familiar wire trip inside my chest. "Let's just keep walking," I told Marcus, but Marcus thought it was funny. He tapped the clown lightly on the shoulder and said, "Nice costume, man." The clown didn't respond. He just shifted his gaze from me to Marcus and back to me, and the smile didn't change at all. Not a muscle moved. We walked away. For about 30 seconds, I felt better. "That was unsettling," I said. "For you, maybe," Marcus said. "I thought he was kind of hilarious, like a knockoff Chaplin." We made one more loop around the fair, finished our cocoa, and headed back toward my house. The route was straightforward. Out the parking lot entrance, right on Elmwood, left on Cedar Ridge, 2 blocks, and we were at my front door. Simple. 5 minutes, maybe 6. We had been walking for less than a minute when Marcus grabbed my arm. "Did you hear that?" he said. I had. Footsteps. Behind us, on the sidewalk, slightly irregular in rhythm, as if someone was taking care to match the pace of their steps to the ambient noise of the street. We both turned at the same time. The sidewalk behind us was empty. "Probably just someone walking home," Marcus said, but his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. We kept walking. The footsteps returned, still behind us, still just outside the range of certainty. Marcus was quiet, now. The streets were empty enough that sound traveled clearly, and there was no question that something was back there. By the time we reached the turn onto Cedar Ridge, Marcus said he wanted to head home. His house was in the opposite direction. I told him he should wait, that I'd be alone in the house, that whatever was behind us might follow me the rest of the way. He hesitated, and I could see on his face the math he was doing between his own comfort and mine. "Okay," he said. "Let's just get inside fast." My house was at the end of the block. We walked quickly, not running. I think we were both trying not to give whatever was behind us the satisfaction of knowing we were scared. My porch light was on. The front yard was in shadow. I dug into my jacket pocket for my keys. I had 3 keys on my keychain: front door, back door, and my bike lock. In the dark, They were identical by feel. Same size, same weight, same cut. I held all three up and tried to pick the right one by the light of my phone. Marcus grabbed my shoulder. The clown was standing in the shrubs beside my front porch, half concealed by the overgrown rhododendron that my parents had been meaning to trim back for 2 years. He was completely still. His face was turned toward us. He had followed us, silently, for 2 full blocks. The first key didn't work. My hands were shaking now, and I could feel Marcus right behind me, and I could feel the clown in my peripheral vision, taking a step forward out of the bushes, moving toward us with no urgency whatsoever, as if he already knew how this was going to end. The second key didn't work. He was on the front walk now. 10 feet away, maybe. The third key turned the lock. We threw ourselves through the door and slammed it hard enough to rattle the frame. Marcus threw the deadbolt. I put my back against the door and stood there trying to remember how to breathe. I called my parents. My dad answered on the third ring, and I explained what happened quickly, my voice steady in a way I wasn't expecting, and he told us to go upstairs, get something heavy if we could find it, and get into an interior room away from the windows. He was calling the police as we spoke. We went upstairs and locked ourselves in my brother's room. Marcus sat on the floor with his back against the bed. I moved to the window and lifted one slat of the blinds. The clown was standing in my driveway. He was standing with his feet shoulder-width, apart, arms at his sides, looking up at the window where I was standing, looking directly at me with that motionless, unreadable face. The porch light caught the white of his makeup and turned it slightly yellow. His shadow stretched long and thin across the concrete. I let the blind fall. Marcus and I sat on the floor together in the dark, listening. We didn't speak. We could hear our own breathing. 12 minutes later, I looked again. The driveway was empty. The police came 40 minutes after that. They walked the perimeter of the house and checked the street in both directions and found nothing. The officer we spoke to was professional and kind, and he explained that there had been a handful of similar reports in the area over the past 2 weeks, someone in clown makeup appearing in residential neighborhoods late at night, following people, standing outside homes. He didn't have more information than that. He left us his card and told us to call immediately if it happened. Again, Marcus slept on the couch that night. Neither of us slept much. In the morning, in the daylight, with coffee and cereal and the ordinary noise of a Wednesday, it was easier to talk about. We rationalized pieces of it. Someone pulling a prank. A weird neighbor with no social awareness. A very committed Halloween enthusiast who hadn't gotten the memo that it was November. But I kept thinking about his face in the window. The stillness of it. The way he had looked up at the exact window we were standing at, as if he had known we would be there, as if he had positioned himself deliberately in our sight line. Pranks are noisy. Pranks want to see your reaction. They want the moment of revelation, the scream, the recognition. This had been completely, utterly silent. No laughter, no performance, just watching. That is what I could not explain away. And still can't. Something on the road. Before I tell you what happened, I want to say this. I am not someone who scares easily. I grew up in a town so small that some people forget it exists. Harlan Creek, South Carolina, population 130, give or take a few who come and go with the seasons. There's a post office, a gas station, a diner that closes at 3 in the afternoon, and not much else. The kind of place where everybody knows your name and your business and your grandmother's maiden name. I've lived there my whole life. 14 years old, and I had never been anywhere else that felt like home. In a place like Harlan Creek, kids grow up fast in certain ways. You learn to handle things. You learn that the forest at night is just the forest, and that strange sounds usually have ordinary explanations, and that the fastest way to embarrass yourself is to let people see you spooked by nothing. I was not the kid who jumped at horror movies. I was not the kid who needed the light left on. I was the kid who worked a real job from the age of 14 and walked a mile in both directions to get there. The job was at Stone Mill Lumber Yard on Route 9, and it was exactly as unglamorous as it sounds. I loaded lumber for customers. I stacked boards. I moved things from here to there and back again. It was physical work that left me tired in a clean, satisfying way, and I was good at it. The pay was honest. The hours were long, but predictable. The walk to and from work was my favorite part of the day, 1 mile each way on a narrow county road that wound through the low hills outside of town. No other houses on that stretch, just woods on both sides and the occasional deer grazing at the shoulder. In the mornings, the mist sat low over the pavement and burned off slowly as the sun came up. At night, the sky was so clear out there that I could name constellations. I did the walk in every kind of weather. It was mine. I knew every dip in the road, every tree that leaned at an angle, every stretch where the gravel piled at the edge of the asphalt. I want you to understand how well I knew that road before I tell you what I found on it. It was a Thursday morning in late August, the kind of morning where the heat is already building before 9 o'clock, and the air smells like cut grass and something faintly sweet underneath it. I left for work around 1:30 in the afternoon, same as always, kicking rocks along the shoulder to pass the time. I liked how the flat, freshly sealed asphalt made them skip, sometimes 3 or 4 times before they settled in the dirt. It was a small and completely pointless thing that I did almost every day and thought nothing of. I kicked a rock, and it skipped wide, bouncing off the edge of the road and landing in the red clay dirt at the tree line. I went to kick it again and stopped. There was something lying in the dirt next to where the rock had landed, round and small and bright red, almost obscene against the dull ochre of the clay. I picked it up and squeezed it experimentally between 2 fingers. It honked. A clown nose. I stood there holding it for a moment, looking up and down the empty road. Foam rubber, the kind that fits over the tip of a real nose with a little elastic loop. Faded at the edges, slightly damp with morning dew. I turned it over in my hand. There was nothing remarkable about it except for the fact that it had no business being here. No carnival, no event, no gathering of any kind for miles in any direction. I carried it to work in my jacket pocket and showed it to the guys on the loading dock. Everyone agreed it was bizarre. I put it on and honked it twice and got a few laughs. We left it on the edge of the workbench and went back to loading lumber, and nobody mentioned it again. By the time I clocked out at 9:30 that night, I had mostly forgotten about it. I'd left my earbuds at home that morning, so the walk back was quiet. Just the road and the dark and the usual sounds. The chirping of crickets rising and falling in waves, the deep, rolling chorus of frogs from the drainage, ditches, the occasional pop of gravel under my boots. I was used to the dark out there. The moon was up and nearly full, and on a night like that, I barely needed a flashlight. I was about halfway home when I saw something on the road ahead. It was far enough away that it was more impression than detail. A shape, a figure, standing in the center line of the road, maybe 150 yards ahead. My first thought was deer. We had a lot of deer on that stretch, and it wasn't unusual to see one standing frozen in the road, staring back at you with those lamp-flat eyes. I slowed my pace and squinted into the moonlight. The shape was wrong for a deer. I kept walking. At 100 yards I could make out that it was tall, taller than a deer would be standing still, with a different silhouette, broader through the shoulders. The fog was rolling in from the fields on both sides of the road, and it blurred the edges of things, made them uncertain. But the shape was unmistakably upright, bipedal. At about 90 yards, the figure moved, fast, off to the left, back into the tree line. I watched the darkness swallow whatever it was, and I stood still for a moment, listening. Silence. I told myself it was a person, a neighbor taking a late walk who didn't want to have a conversation, someone from one of the distant farms cutting through to the road. It happened occasionally. I kept walking. I passed the spot where the figure had been standing. The asphalt here was slightly wet from the fog. I was looking at the road surface, noting the faint imprint of bare feet in the dew on the asphalt, the kind of mark a person makes walking without shoes, when I heard footsteps behind me, 20 yards back, on the road, not in the woods, on the road. I stopped. The footsteps stopped. "Hey there," said a voice. I turned around. He was standing in the middle of the road, maybe 30 feet behind me, hands clasped behind his back, wearing what had clearly once been a clown costume, baggy checkered pants, an oversized shirt with the remnants of polka dots still visible through layers of grime. The costume looked like it had been worn every day for months. The colors had dissolved into a uniform brownish gray, except for the cuffs and collar, which were still faintly yellow. His feet were bare, his toenails were black. His face was painted, white base coat running with humidity and sweat, bleeding into rivulets along the lines of his jaw, red mouth smeared wide. Around his eyes, the makeup had darkened with the moisture until it looked like bruising, like 2 deep hollows in the white. He tilted his head to the side with a slow, deliberate movement and looked at me the way a dog looks at something it is deciding how to approach. He smiled. Not a clown smile, a real one. "I think you have something of mine," he said. His voice was soft, conversational, completely calm, which was somehow worse than if he'd been screaming. There was nothing frantic about him, nothing reactive. He spoke the way someone speaks when they are in no hurry because they already know how things are going to go. I thought of the nose in my jacket pocket, left on the workbench. I didn't have it. "I don't have anything of yours," I said. I was already walking backward, slow and steady, facing him. My house was 3/4 of a mile away. There was nothing between me and it but road and dark. The clown tilted his head the other way. His smile widened. "Well, then," he said with a small, light laugh, like someone told him a joke he'd heard before, but still found funny. "If you don't have my nose—" He brought one hand out from behind his back. The moonlight caught the blade. "I'm going to need yours." I turned and ran. I ran harder than I have run before or since. Every instinct I had, all the careful, reasonable 14-year-old logic about not panicking, about staying calm, about things usually having ordinary explanations, every last bit of it was incinerated in an instant, replaced by something older and more animal. Run, run, run. I could hear him behind me almost immediately. Bare feet on asphalt. He was fast, faster than I expected. I could hear the sound of something metal dragging on the pavement. Long, intermittent scrapes, like the tip of a blade, swinging at his side as he ran. And the sound of it ate into my spine and fed my legs more speed than I knew I had. He was gaining. I crested the first hill and started down the other side, the road falling away in front of me into a long, flat stretch, and I could hear him almost right behind me now, could almost feel the displacement of air, and I thought, this is where it ends. And then I crested the second hill, and a pair of headlights hit me full in the face. A pickup truck, coming from the direction of town, slowing at the sight of me running down the center of the road with my arms out. I screamed at it. I don't remember what I said. I remember the truck stopping and the window coming down and a man's voice saying, "Son, son, slow down," and I turned around and the road behind me was empty. He was gone, not running away, not stepping back into the trees, just gone, as if he had been switched off. The driver called the police on his cell phone while I sat in the passenger seat of his truck with the door locked and my hands wrapped around my knees. The officers came and swept the road and the tree line with flashlights and found nothing. No footprints, no discarded costume, nothing. I quit the job at the lumber yard that week. I have not walked that road at night since. I am not sure I ever will. I found out later, when this started showing up on the news, that what happened to me was not an isolated incident. Reports were coming in from other small towns, figures in deteriorating clown costumes appearing on rural roads, following people, emerging from tree lines. Some were clearly pranks. Some were clearly not. Mine did not feel like a prank. The machete, if that's what it was not a prank. The bare feet leaving prints on the wet asphalt were not a prank. The silence in which he had positioned himself behind me while I passed was not a prank. I don't know what he was. I don't know if he was working alone or with others. I don't know why he chose that road, on that night, for me. I don't know what would have happened if the truck hadn't appeared at exactly the moment it did. I think about that truck a lot. What they have in common, 3 people, 3 different states, 3 different nights, a carnival in Ohio, a fair in Wisconsin, a county road in South Carolina. No connection between them except this, something wearing a painted face and a performance of humanity that didn't quite fit. What makes these accounts disturbing, genuinely, persistently disturbing, not just in the moment but in the retelling, is not the chase. It's not the weapons or the following or the standing in driveways at midnight. It's the stillness, the patience, the absence of the reaction you'd expect from someone who was doing this for fun, for the scream, for the thrill of the reveal. None of these clowns laughed at their own joke. None of them ran when they were spotted. They stood, they watched, they waited. And then, when the moment passed, they disappeared as quietly and completely as they had appeared. Real fear is not the jump scare. Real fear is the thing that's standing somewhere behind you in the dark, that you can't hear moving, and that you can only prove is there by the feeling at the back of your neck that will not go away. These people carry that feeling with them. They have for years. And somewhere out there, on a road you've driven 100 times, in a park you've always considered safe, at the edge of a tree line you've never had reason to look at twice, the painted face is patient. It can wait.